Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for spending some time today to talk a little bit about your lung transplant journey. But before we get into that, could you maybe tell us a little bit about you yourself, the person?
Of course. My name is Jenny. I am 47 years old and I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis as a baby. And I've been living my best life with my lung transplant. And I currently live in El Paso, Texas right now. I had my transplant in Houston, Texas, and I'm just doing great.
Yeah, and we might touch on that a little bit because you've had to do a little bit of interstate travel during your journey. So we'll maybe touch on that as we go through your story. But let me
Okay.
get into now that we have that setting and the explanation that your lung disease was cystic fibrosis, which, for people who don't know, is a genetic and inherited disease affecting the lungs and other things. And it's interesting because my son doesn't have cystic fibrosis, but he does carry the gene. And unfortunately, it's implicated in his disease process.
Oh,
So he's
yeah.
a CFTR positive. So it's kind of interesting that there are all these discoveries we're making in the last
Yeah.
20 years that are starting
Right.
to uncover a little bit about how
Yeah.
genetics affects the way our bodies respond and on from there. Let's lean in a little bit now and accelerate forward to what led up to you requiring a lung transplant.
So it was obviously the cystic fibrosis. I was born with it and I lived with it my entire life. I was very lucky growing up. I wasn't too sick, I guess you could say. I didn't struggle as much as some other CF patients do. As a kid, it was really hard to tell that I even had it because I was really active and my mom made me go outside and play.
Hmm.
Didn't treat me like I had CF. And so it wasn't until I was in my 30s where it really started to show that I had CF and that I was having problems. And in my 30s is when I would start I could tell my lung capacity was starting to decline. And I was also diagnosed with lupus in 2014, which expedited all of the lung issues. So, before my transplant, a couple years before my transplant is whenever I started requiring oxygen full time.
Hmm.
And I it just got a little bit worse each year with the lupus and the CF. And then by the time I had my transplant, I was pretty sick. I was spending weeks at a time in the hospital. I required oxygen. I didn't have energy. And so, when my lung capacity hit, in the 30s, my pulmonologists were like, okay, we need to start talking about transplant. We need to start
Right.
getting you evaluated and, getting prepared for lung transplant.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I think, from my story, I was almost the reverse. I had a very healthy, normal life and then suddenly developed
Yeah.
interstitial lung disease and became sick or leading to the transplant over the course of about 2.5 years. And
Yeah.
so, the kind of the thing that I think is really important there is the disease processes that lead to requiring
Yeah.
an organ transplant, whether it be lungs, heart, liver, etc., can be very
Right.
varied. So it's interesting to compare your very kind of long decline with a genetic disorder compared to
Yeah.
mine, which I'm pretty sure is genetically implicated as well. The problem with
Yeah.
idiopathic is it's medicine's dirty word for we don't know. So
Right.
there's going to be more discoveries that occur about my disease process and that. But
And I've always
when
thought that, oh, sorry.
no,
I've always
please go
thought
ahead.
that when you have CF or when any disease, if you have it your whole life, it's a little bit easier to handle as compared to having it, like not having it. And then when you're older and you develop this disease where you have to change your whole life, and now you have this disease that you have to learn about, you have to start understanding, you have to change your lifestyle just to, survive. It's a little bit more difficult than if you have it your entire life. Because, like, for
Mm,
me, I had CF, that's all I knew. And so I think it was a little bit easier for me because I was prepared for transplant my entire life. I knew it was going to come eventually. It was still really hard to deal with when it did come, but I think it's just different in that. And
Yeah.
I would say I'm glad I had it my whole life and I didn't have to adjust to a whole new lifestyle because I think it was easier.
Except spoiler, because you and I have gotten to know a little bit about that. That's where we start to come into your interstate travel part, because
Yes.
well, why don't you take that story up in terms of when you got notified, okay, you now need a lung transplant, and we're ready for you.
Right. So I grew up and lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my whole CF life was there. When I needed a transplant, they're like, okay, you need to start being evaluated for a transplant. They didn't have that in Albuquerque. They didn't have lung transplants. They only did the kidneys. And so I had to start looking for a different place to have it. I started off in San Francisco, which was originally where I was supposed to go. And I went there for like the pre-evaluation. But then my insurance came back and said, no, you can't go there. And so I ended up in Houston based off of my insurance. That's where they said I could go. And so I went to Houston to do the pre-evaluation and get started. I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't sick enough yet to be listed. So they just wanted to get the ball rolling. So then, going back to Albuquerque and planning for this transplant, my husband and I decided it would be easier if we just moved to Houston. That way there's no traveling there. So we did that. We moved to Houston and in January, and then later in September is when I got the transplant. And so we lived in Houston for 5 years after the transplant. And then I'm doing so well that we decided to move a little bit closer to home, which is now El Paso, Texas. It's closer to Albuquerque. It's not, it's not in Albuquerque, but we're still closer. We're closer to our family. And so, and I still travel back to Houston for my doctor's appointments, and they still follow me in that clinic just from afar. Yeah.
So leading up to the surgery, in the immediate days, as you were sort of starting to go, okay, I'm now ready. Talk a little bit about that process and what led up to you getting ready and the call.
Okay, that's great that you asked that, because I have a story that I love to share about my experience before I got it. So we're in Houston and we're really close to Galveston. And in Galveston, there is like a seawall, right? It's where the cars drive, and you can park along the seawall. And then when you get down, you have to walk down the big hill to get to the ocean, right? And so I had been going along. I was used to being on oxygen. I was used to running out of breath whenever I walked or exercised, whatever I did. Taking a shower, I would run out of breath. And so it was in July, which is a couple months before my transplant. And my husband and I went to Galveston and we were going to watch the fireworks on the beach. So we went there, we walked down and we watched the fireworks. And on the way back up to the car after we were done, I was struggling to get back to the car. I would have to stop several times to catch my breath. I was coughing. The coughing was so difficult, like it would burn. It felt like knives in my chest. And I finally made it up to the car, and my lungs hurt so badly. And it took me a while to get my breath just to get into the car. And I was coughing. I was miserable. And it was that night that I was like, okay, I'm ready. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Like this, I'm ready for my transplant. And before that night, I never thought that I was actually ready. I thought it was going to be a long time. And so we go on a couple more months. I can still do things, right? I'm still going out. I'm still trying to live my best life. I'm just, I'm out of breath all the time. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I have oxygen, and we go to the doctor clinic appointment, and I'm starting to get an infection in my lungs, and they do the 6-minute walk test, which is where you walk for 6 minutes. They monitor your heart rate. They monitor your sat level to see how well you're breathing. And they had to keep turning up my oxygen level. I think I got up to like 10 liters when I was doing that test. They told me at that appointment that I was probably they were going to put me on the list. It was time to be listed. And so I had asked them, how long it was going to take. And of course, they can't give you an answer. The doctor was like, probably maybe within a couple of months. Like they thought I was that sick. So I was like, okay.
Yep.
So my husband and I were driving home from that doctor's appointment. And we were trying to plan, right? We were trying to think like, okay, we got to do all these things. We got to pack a bag. We got to get everything in order for the transplant. Well, I'm sorry, I misspoke. That was like the week before. So
No
then
problem.
they put me on the list. And then the day before I went to the doctor's appointment. And so we're planning. And the next morning is when they called me to go get the transplant. And we were shocked that it was the next day when they were saying that it was going to take a couple of months.
Yep.
And so I go and I have the transplant. And then a couple of months, and I know you probably want to talk about the transplant process, but let me go back to my story.
Sure.
A couple of months after my transplant, I was doing so well. I felt amazing. I was doing great. And I told my husband I want to go back to the Galveston to watch the sunrise. And I was starting to think I was going to be a photographer. So I took all my camera stuff with us so we could take pictures. Yeah. And on the way back I told my husband, I want you to let me carry everything back to the car. So we piled all this stuff on me. I had camera gear and blankets and backpack, everything. And I walked up that hill back to the car, and I didn't stop, not one time. I didn't lose my breath. And I got up there, and I just dropped everything, and I just stood there, and I just felt so free in that moment that I was able to breathe. I wasn't coughing. There was no pain. And I just looked up in the sky, and I was just like, thank you. And I felt like I could do anything I wanted to do in that moment. And that was like the best moment I've had since I had my transplant. And it was a great moment. And I just love sharing that story because like I tell people who don't really know about transplant, and it helps them understand that, oh, this is what that did for me. Like this is what getting a new organ would do for somebody. And it was just an amazing feeling that I had. Yeah.
We might return to that when we start talking about the recovery and rehab, because I think you're so correct. Initially, when you've come through the surgery and you're still in hospital, you're obviously very acutely, it's very obvious that you're still ill. But even within a few days, I felt amazing because, I'd been so, like you say, you've been so sick before that even in that short time, even though you've had this massive trauma, medical, surgical trauma to your body, you just go, this is so different. This is a amazing shift in my life. But talk a little bit then about your time in hospital and what you can remember, both immediately, pre and post being taken down to the OR.
So I get the call at 5 a.m. and we go there, and it takes a while to get it all ready, all the blood work and everything. And I had mixed feelings before the surgery. I was really excited that this was happening, but I don't really like to admit this, but it is part of my story, is that on the way to the hospital, I was hoping that it was going to be a dry run because I didn't feel like I was ready yet. I hadn't done all the things that I had talked about the day before with the bag packing and all the stuff I had to get ready. Like I didn't do that. And so I remember thinking, like, I hope that this is a dry run. I don't want to do it today. And I was scared also. I was afraid that something was going to go wrong with the surgery. I was afraid that I wasn't going to wake up. And so it was mixed feelings. And they were taking me down to the OR, and I still thought, okay, there's a chance this could still be a dry run. And I still kind of wanted it to be, but it wasn't. It wasn't a dry run. And they went through with it with the surgery. And thinking back now, like if it was a dry run, I could have gotten a different set of lungs, and it could be a completely different story that I'm telling now. So now I'm very thankful that it wasn't a dry run. And because you don't know what to expect. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. And I hadn't started my own podcast yet, so I didn't hear all the stories from people. So I didn't even really know all the things that could go wrong. So, I was just afraid. And so I woke up from the surgery, and one of my biggest fears was waking up on the ventilator tube, because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to come off of that if I woke up with it. I'd always talked about that. Like, I was always afraid of that. And I did wake up on the ventilator tube.
Mm.
And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't great. It got stuck when they were trying to take it out. So I thought, like, the nurse kept tugging on it and it wouldn't come out. And I was just like, oh my God, they're going to have to put me back under to get the ventilator tube out. But then I'm still going to be, but they ended up getting out. The doctor came and he just yanked on it harder. So it came out, and I didn't have to have it in too long after I woke up. It was only like maybe an hour or so, and it didn't feel good, but it wasn't as bad as I thought. And so I was laying there, and I already started doing well. Like, my back was hurting so badly in the bed that I woke up that I was like, I have to get out of the bed. So I was sitting in the chair like within hours after I woke up. And I remember one of the surgeons came by and was like, oh my gosh, she's already sitting in a chair. And I was like, well, my back's hurting. And so I was in that, intense ICU for just a few hours. And then they moved me to the regular ICU. And then I stayed in the regular ICU for, I think, one full day, maybe a day and a half before I got to a regular room. So I just kept doing well. Everything was progressing nice. They didn't have any complications. So once I was in the regular room, the worst part of the whole thing was the chest tubes that they had.
All the tubes.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
There's so much. Yeah.
I know, there was so much. And it took a few days to get those out. Like, they came out one at a time. And like, finally after the last one, it took, like, that one was stubborn. Like, the last one, it stayed in by itself for like 2 days or 3 days. And they finally took it out. And then I was ready to go home. I was in the hospital a total 11 days. So everything was great. Like, when I went for walks, I started walking the first day. It got better and better each day. And then by the time it was time to go home, I was like, oh, I'm good.
If you've been moved by today's stories, please consider becoming an organ donor. In the United States, go to organdonor.gov, and in the UK, organdonation.nhs.uk. Be someone's hero. Now, your surgery, did you have the kind of cross sternum, the kind of clamshell, as they call it? Or
I had the clamshell.
Yeah. And what people, so this is a little bit gory. So if you're sensitive at all, mute for the next 60 seconds. Yeah. Please come back though. But what if people don't realize, they literally, create a space from just under each armpit right across the middle of your chest. Yeah. And then crank you open, because they've got to get the old lungs out. They've got to get the new lungs in. And so therefore, that's one of the biggest traumas. And because of that, that's why there are so many drains and things, because they are literally going right across your body and disrupting so much of the blood flow and the nerves. And the thing that caught me out was the lymphatic system. There's all these channels between your lymph nodes that control, how various lymphatic fluid flows around your body, in addition to blood and other things. And those all get cut. Well, they don't go back and individually repair them, like they don't go back and individually repair every nerve. Those are gone, and your body will regrow them back. But it's a kind of random process. So I don't know about you, but I still have like weird little sensations 2.5 years in across my chest, where, stuff is obviously still trying to figure itself out, how to repair itself. So that was one of the big things that caught me out, even as I'll continue my recovery.
And it does get better. I'm 7 years out now, and I don't have those sensations, but there is some areas that are still numb that I can't feel. Yeah. I don't think I'll ever get the sensations back.
So you told me a wonderful story there about, being able to carry all that stuff. It's funny, the small victories that we get so excited by
Yeah.
as you go through that. But that was a beautiful story to be able to exemplify what the impact of this gift is. What do you know, if anything, about your donor and about how you came to receive their gift?
I don't really know anything. I know that it was a male, and I know that they speak Spanish. That's it.
Right.
That's all I know. I don't know anything else. In fact, I just finished writing my donor letter last week. I did
wow.
write one right away within the first year. I did learn that they didn't receive that one. I don't know why. Something got mixed up there, and it's taking me this long to write it again. And so I just finished it last week, actually. And I'm having somebody read it for me to interpret to Spanish, and then I'm going to be sending it off. But I don't know anything.
I'm going to do a small advert here and explain that Jenny does do an audio podcast that you can find, and we're going to put the links in the description here. And there's many, many, many terrific stories there. Jenny, is there a particular story that across I think you've got 150 or more episodes on your channel, but is there one that really stood out to you that relates to a donor story?
You mean like a donor family, like meeting a donor family? Or
either way, people who have had an extraordinary experience in terms of, either finding out or still having strong emotions about not finding out who their donor is.
I do have a good story of, in fact, he was one of my early on episodes. I think he was actually number 3. And then I've had him on again since then. His name is Jerry Ray Jr., and he has a really good story about meeting his donor family. And it relates to me because his donor family is also Spanish speaking. And so and now he's a very good friend of mine. In fact, he's on my board of my foundation. And he talks about meeting his donor family and how they speak Spanish. And I really thought it was a really great story. And it was also because it was my first donor family podcast episode, which was also it was my first story that I heard about anybody meeting their donor family ever. And so I think that's a great episode with his donor family. There's another one that I have whose name is Randy Coker, and I got to be with him when he met his donor family.
Oh, wow.
We were at with the foundation. We were at another foundation's run. We were at a booth, and he invited his donor family that he just met on the phone recently to come out and meet him at this walk that we were attending. And so he got to the sister of the donor came to meet him and his wife. And I got to take pictures and see that whole experience. And I felt so emotional, and it wasn't even my story. I just put myself in his shoes, meeting my donor family, and I got to see their interaction. And I was emotional for him, even though he was also emotional. In fact, I think I was maybe a little bit involved in that a little too much because I was trying to ask questions and stuff, and it really wasn't my place to be there. But he was really understanding. But it's just a great experience to watch, and I can't wait to experience that hopefully someday.
But what about your own feelings in terms of the way this gift has come to you?
What do you mean? My own?
In terms of if there's anything spiritual or revelationary that has come to you in the whole process.
Well, I think that the transplant changed me, certainly spiritually. I know that I know my donor's in heaven, and I pray a lot, and I've changed in that way also. I've always been spiritual. I've always been a Christian. I've always been that way. But after my transplant, I feel a little bit closer to that world because I know that my donor's in that world. So, I always say that I hope that whenever I go to heaven and I meet my donor, that he's going to say, he's proud of me and proud of what the life that I've lived with his lungs.
Yeah.
And so I think spiritually it has helped me grow I guess you could say it's helped me grow. It's helped me want to be more spiritual, and
Hmm.
it's helped me feel closer to him by being more spiritual, if that makes sense. And it probably
Mm.
doesn't, but like I'm trying to say, like, hey, I'm more spirit. I don't know what I'm trying to
No,
say. I
no,
can't get it out. Like I
I
can
get
think
it.
it, but it's not coming out.
No,
But
listen,
yeah,
and a lot of people do. I think that the reason I asked that question is, I think we all go through that process of, okay, this is great. I've come through this. I've received this gift. Why me? Because,
yes,
last year, 2024, lung transplants in the US crossed a terrific milestone. There were
yeah,
3,000 lung transplants took place, more than 3,000 last year. It has been, and particularly during COVID, when it became obviously the whole medical community's attention was focused on a very
yeah,
different set of priorities at that time. The amount of surgery that was taking place dropped off dramatically. And so therefore there's
mm,
been a kind of recovery period as those transplant teams have kind of restaffed, reskilled, and gotten back up to speed. And thankfully they're developing new techniques all the time that are becoming more reliable and better and stronger. They're taking on more sick patients and having good
yeah,
outcomes with them. So the
yeah,
average survival time is increasing. But I think that for all of us who come through this, we ask ourselves, why me? Why did I get this benefit? And obviously, many of us search for meaning in that. And whether you are religious or not, I think
right,
that there is a lot of people who have a feeling of what should I do with this gift?
yeah,
In my case, it was, he clearly has a purpose for me. You know,
right,
what should I do? What should I do with my purpose? And I turned it to, he saved me because I have to still keep caring for my family,
right.
because that was my purpose before. And he obviously felt I wasn't done. Now I still continue to do other things. I've become this
Yeah,
podcaster now. I'm writing on Substack and
right.
things. Those were things I always wanted to do and just didn't prioritize or put the time in. So I think
Right.
that's an interesting one.
I think when I ask that question the most is when I see somebody who has been in my situation and hasn't done well and passed away, or something happened, like they've had tons of complications, or they get cancer and they pass away, or like I see some friends who are just struggling to survive, even though that they did do well, but now they're struggling. And so I always
Yeah.
have that feeling of, why is this person not doing well and I'm doing well? Like, why
Yes.
was I chosen to do well? And then I think that, um, I started my foundation, and I started that because I felt like I needed to give back. Like I needed to prove to my donor that I'm doing what I can with his lungs. Like I'm proving that I'm going to have a purpose. Like I'm going to do
Yeah.
something with my life now because I was given the second chance. And it's my responsibility to uh, make sure that the way that I'm living my life now is with purpose. Like you
Yeah.
say, you look for purpose. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. We all enjoy trying to define that. And I think it's kind of interesting. Many people go through their lives and don't even think about, well, why am I here?
Yeah.
The majority of us do, whether it's in the quiet of the night or,
Yeah.
when you wake up and you're sitting there contemplating life, whether it's on a beach, staring out and going, what's my purpose for being here? Lots of people connect with that at some point. When you
Right.
receive that gift another time, I think it causes you to refocus on that. And I
Yeah.
certainly know that applied to me. If you've been moved by today's stories, please consider becoming an organ donor. In the United States, go to organdonor.gov, and in the UK, organdonation.nhs.uk. Be someone's hero. So what is this process, this experience taught you about yourself? I have a favorite word, resilience. I think that many of us who thrive through this process, because you're right. There are some people who are just so sick that they can't handle the trauma of going through this process, because it is, I mean, it's pretty radical as medical procedures go. And so from that perspective, there are some people who just don't thrive through this. But for you, what was the lessons you learned about you, Jenny?
That is a good question. That's a tough one. I think I learned that I am, like, I guess I kind of knew it before, but it reinforced it that I am like a really generous. Like I care. Like I
Mm-hmm.
learned that I am really, I have a lot of compassion for not just my people that I know and that I love, but like for everybody. So I've learned that I am a really compassionate person. I care about everything. So I care about people who are going through this process that I went through. I care about people who don't understand it, and I'm saying this all wrong. I just learned that I'm a lot more compassionate than I thought I was. And I try to do everything I can to help as many people as I can. And I like that about myself.
Mm.
And I learned that that's a tough question, Stuart. Where you gonna ask the hard question?
You see, I saved it towards the end of our interview, so
Yeah.
again, trying to warm
No,
you up to it.
and I, with the compassion, I'm like you said, I've learned that I'm resilient, even though I kind of already knew because I grew up with all this stuff. But I just, I just learned that I'm capable of doing anything that I set my mind to. And
Well,
I,
and maybe that is part of the purpose. If there is a design,
yeah,
then maybe that's your mission. That's your
yeah,
mission, because I know when I found your podcast, I was so ecstatic. And the reason I wanted to do this special episode, Bethany and I do these conversations, cross generational, because she's my daughter. So she's a millennial and I'm a very late tail boomer. So I
yeah,
get to own the hey boomer label.
yeah,
And so a lot of our conversations are related to business and healthcare IT and those kind of topics. And I wanted to do this particular thing because when I found your podcast, I was so happy that I found more stories about my experience. Because I think that, just as you described, it's very difficult before you contemplate this transformation that occurs to you and go through the experience. And it's a very radical experience. It's very difficult to contemplate and understand that. And I think that's why your pre and post label is so important, because
yeah,
there are people who are contemplating this. There are family members, loved ones of people who are about to go through this, who absolutely are terrified that they hear all the bad things, they hear all the rest, because doctors being doctors, they of course want to couch everything in the, well, just understand, not everything's perfect. And they take you through all the speeches, loading up the risks and the potential downsides that there might be to what they're doing. I loved my medical director, David Erasmus, at the transplant center in Vanderbilt, who basically said, listen, we are taking you away from a fatal disease that is going to kill you. And in my case, it would have been within days. And we're giving you another set of problems that can be managed so that you can go on and live your life. And I think that that's the thing, that whenever I meet other people who are pre-transplant, and I'm talking to my friend Dean Marika in this episode as well, Dean and I spoke because we knew each other before in our previous life. He also was in information technology sales, and we'd worked together before. And suddenly I found out that he needed a lung transplant, and he was terrified, and his wife was terrified. So Sarah and I spent time with them, and it was really to try and encourage them to say, no, there's such an amazing life after you go
yeah,
through this very scary thing, that you just have to embrace it. You have to. And yes, be aware of all the things you need to manage and the risks and the fact that you're immunosuppressed to go forward. And I think your podcast is such a gift to that community to be able to understand the stories of so many other people. So I find you inspirational in your mission in terms of your desire to try and support that community so that
Well, thank
they're
you.
able to move forward. So I do want to credit you as being, an inspiration for me. Because you did. I found your podcast and I listened to it voraciously to try and understand more. And that was after I'd had the transplant because mine happened so quickly.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that was
thank you. I
amazing.
appreciate that.
Yeah. So
I have
let's wrap.
taken a break from the podcast. I haven't had any episodes lately. I'm taking a little bit of a break because I'm going back to school to get my bachelor's degree, and that's just
Wonderful.
sucking up all my time. So I just haven't had the chance to keep going, but I'll be back. I just taken a little break.
No, and I would encourage you to, because I think that you had a rare gift and you'd built that up, but you were incredibly prodigious and productive. So I think that from that perspective, I don't blame you at all for taking a sabbatical from it and getting on with some life. But genuinely, whether it's through your foundation or the podcast, I just encourage you to continue to share because I benefited, and I know just from your listener counts, many other people did too. So let's
Thank you.
wrap up this conversation. I'm going to ask you two things. I talked about resilience. You talked about compassion, and you can say it's compassion, but what's the one word, if you have one, that describes your journey through this process?
One word only. There
You
go
can
again.
join a couple, but I'm looking for one word.
Okay. I'm going to say beautiful. It's a beautiful journey. And that's just one word. I mean, I got like 25, but we'll go with that one.
Fantastic. And obviously, we're going to have this episode around the time of National Lung Transplant Awareness Day. And I think that there's been a lot of, perhaps negative press nationally around the transplant services and about, sort of organ donation and, the ethics around it. But if you were talking to somebody out there who's maybe on the fence about whether they should sign that organ donation card or check that box on their driver's license or go to the website that's going to be in the description to register as an organ donor, what would you say to them?
Well, I would first tell them my story with the hill and the ocean in Galveston. But I would tell them if they're worried about it because of the press and the things that have been talked about in the press, I would tell them don't necessarily look at one story that somebody's telling you that's negative. Like turn around and look at all of these beautiful people who have second chances and are able to go and live another life because somebody was brave enough to say yes to organ donation. I would tell them that they have a chance to live on in somebody else and improve somebody's life and give them a chance that they could, recover from what they're going through and be able to do beautiful things with their new life. I would tell them that I'm a person who could not be here today because somebody didn't say yes. And I would tell them about my foundation and how I'm able to help more people with their journeys. I would tell them about my podcast. I would say, go listen to these stories of these people who have been on their deathbed and being ready to die. And then somebody at the last minute who said yes to organ donation was able to give them a new life, something where people who have children can watch their children grow up or have grandchildren who can sit and play with their grandchildren or, have a family that they don't have to leave behind now. And that person who's getting ready to check off that box can give them something. That person can be a hero to somebody. So hopefully by saying that, they'll be like, okay, yes, I'm going to say yes.
That's awesome. Jenny, that is such a beautiful way for us to end this segment. I've already praised you for the amazing work that you've done for this community. And I hope that you find new and different ways to be able to express that compassion that you talked about. So, Jenny,
Well, thank
thank you
you.
so
And
much for joining me for this conversation, and
you
I
are
wish you
so
very
welcome.
well.
And I just want to tell you that I'm proud of you for starting your own podcast and spreading more awareness. So I think that you're doing a great job, and congratulations on your podcast. And thank you for being that person who is also helping the community. So you are
Thank
also
you.
doing a great job.
Yeah, we've got to do something. As I said,
Gotta do
we've been
something.
given this gift. We've got to do something with it.
Yes,
Jenny,
for sure.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.